What's up, everybody? Back by popular demand, and because it's easy and convenient for me to knock out, I'm doing yet another tier list on my channel. If I haven't lost all my subscribers by now, I'm sure I'm going to after this third one. This is not what my channel is going to be from now on by any means. However, I've been super busy the last few months and taking weeks at a time to produce one video that may only get 100 views isn't really in my channel's best interest or my best interest, and these are super fun to do. I feel knowledgeable about what I'm talking about for one rare moment in my life, and you guys seem to be digging it, all 10 of you who comment on these. So someone asked me to do a tier list on Pink Floyd's studio albums, and that's what I'm going to do. Now, there are three phases of Pink Floyd, as I'm sure a lot of you may recognize. There is the psychedelic period of Pink Floyd. There is the mainstream cream of the crop Pink Floyd era, and then there is the post Roger Waters era of Pink Floyd, where Roger, one of the founding members and key songwriters, left the band, where David Gilmour had to take over lead singer duties 100% full time and had to do the songwriting as well. So we're just going to start off, as we always do with the first album. We're going to break this down. I went into this thinking this was going to be really easy, not realizing how many damn studio albums Pink Floyd actually has. So, starting off with Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Now, I got to tell you guys, I really, really dislike the psychedelic period of Pink Floyd's music. I don't like psychedelic music in general. This album is a D tier to me. One thing I think is funny about this particular tier that someone made the template for is there is no F tier on this one, because I guess with Pink Floyd, you just are not allowed to give them a failing record. Even their most mediocre attempt at music is better than any other band. So I can respect that. I can respect that none of their albums are going to be an F tier per se, although I don't know, the more I think about it, I might argue that. But anyway, Piper at the Gates of Dawn gets the D tier for me. Very psychedelic, very, I wouldn't say very experimental, but there is certainly some experimental stuff going on here. I just don't like this style of music. This is completely different than the Pink Floyd that the world would come to know and love later on in their career. And there's just no particular song on here that I listen to that I get totally turned on by. And Astronomy Domain was a big one back in their early days. Interstellar Overdrive. And then the one that always sticks out to me is the song Bike. I've got a bike, you can ride it if you like, blah, 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 blah. You're the only girl that fits into my world. It's just weird, like poppy, almost like attempt at like a psychedelic Beatles track. A lot of early Floyd sounds like psychedelic Beatles to me, but just not an album that I ever care to go and listen to. It's very dated sounding. It's a style of music that has not been popular for some time, and so that's where I'm putting that one. Up next, we have A Saucerful of Secrets, which I'm also going to put in the D tier. Not a fan of The Saucerful of Secrets. Again, there's just kind of more wanking about. There's more experimentation going on here. Let There Be More Light has a promising start, but then gets, kind of bogged down in the middle. Set the Controls to the Heart of the Sun was another very long-winded psychedelic wank by Pink Floyd back in the day when they would do these songs live. And I think these kind of songs are what got the band in favor of the critics, because this was very leading edge music at the time. This was very popular music at the time. It was kind of in vogue. It's kind of like how now, like noise rock or hardcore or whatever is kind of this underground, or I should say, like emo punk now seems to be this underground big movement with these DIY musicians. I feel like Pink Floyd back in the day with their psychedelic jams, it's kind of that same thing. So they got this fan base from doing those songs, but it's just not music that I feel particularly ages well, and it's not music I particularly like. Up next, we move on to Pink Floyd's third studio album, which is More. This would get the F tier if they had one, but they don't on this one. This album is a soundtrack. It went to a movie of the same name called More, and it is just very uninspired, mediocre, nothing crazy going on with this album. It blows my mind that a band of this much promise, even coming out of the gate, would have their third studio album be like a soundtrack to a movie, and not even a popular movie at that. It was I don't think I've ever met anyone who's ever brought up the movie More, and I haven't met anybody who likes Pink Floyd who's ever brought up the album either. I don't think a lot of Pink Floyd fans know this album exists. So yeah, definitely not a fan of that album. And I've listened to all these albums. I've had to re-listen to them like in a crash course kind of before making this video, but their A material I know like the back of my fucking hand. So moving on to their fourth album, if you will, Umaguma. Again, I'm going to put that in the D tier. You're going to see a big delineation between what I think is Pink Floyd's best and what I think is their worst. It's not like Genesis or Rush, where there's all this room for in-between discussion on, well, maybe that album could be an A or a B, or maybe this really should be an F. With Pink Floyd, for me, it's pretty cut and dry where albums stand. Umaguma is a very weird album in the sense that it is, the first side is a live album of songs from their previous efforts, Astronomy, Don't Mind, and Careful With That Axe, Eugene. Then you got Set the Controls to a Harvest Sun, Saucer Full of Secrets. The second album, if you will, because this is a double album, the second album was new material, but the caveat on this was that each member of the band was going to do their own song, almost like a little mini solo album within an album type dealio. So you had Rick Wright doing Sisyphus parts 1 through 4, and he even went on to say after he felt they were pretentious. And then you had Waters, who did Grantchester Meadows, and then the song Several Small Species of Small Furry Animals Gathered Together in a Cave and Grooving with a Pict. Now, this was way before Fall Out Boy started doing the long-ass song titles. Waters was truly ahead of his time, but all these songs are kind of ass, especially the Roger Waters ones. Gilmour did The Narrow Way, which he even admitted that he had no real inspiration for this particular album and did not particularly care for. And then Nick Mason, the drummer, did the last, the Grand Vizier's Garden Party, and his wife played flute on it, whatever. Not a very good album of original material. Again, they come out of the gate and it takes them so long to get to what we know and love them for, because then, when we get to their next album, Atom Heart Mother, again, D tier for me. I look at this point of Pink Floyd's career as just something that I pretend didn't really happen. I know these albums exist because I see them still on record store shelves, but I just kind of like to forget about them. And, you know, the crazy thing about the music industry is back in this time, you were still allowed 4 or 5 albums to develop your sound and prove yourself before they pulled the plug on you and dropped you from the label. Not nowadays. Your first song has to be a hit for them to keep messing with you. If your first song isn't a hit, then you're done. Back in the day, you had albums worth of failure before you finally, you know, were seen as viable or non-viable by the record industry. So Atom Heart Mother, we're up to the 5th studio album from Pink Floyd now, and they're still just doing these kind of wank sessions. Atom Heart Mother, the title track, is a 23-minute, 44-second jam that just, I don't know, it's kind of got some like orchestra rock elements in there. It's got some experimentation in there. And then you get to, the B-side or side 2 of this album, and it's just kind of your same poppy, folky, British Pink Floyd fare. Nothing that I want to listen to again, honestly. I'm not interested in this period of Pink Floyd at all. Then we get to the breaking point of this. Almost like Rush had Permanent Waves, which was the signaling of the end of their long-winded prog jams. We get Metal, which I'm going to put in the B tier, because on Metal, that's when we have the song Echoes, which takes up all of side 2 of this record. And Echoes signals, choreographs, is waving in Dark Side of the Moon. With Reckless Abandon, it is clear that Dark Side of the Moon is coming when you hear this song Echoes. It is not as good necessarily as a song that would be on Dark Side of the Moon. I guess you could make an argument that it is, but this is definitely just a huge indication that this is the direction they're going in. And as we know, Dark Side of the Moon changed the world. And also, One of These Days, the opening track, I feel, is an underrated Pink Floyd song. It is a really badass Space Jam sounding kind of instrumental with, complete with pitched down demonic vocals saying in the background, "One of these days, I'm gonna rip you to pieces." And then who can forget that tremoloed bass guitar, that dun 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 dun. That was cool. And that came out way back in the early 70s, so felt like it was pretty innovative for its time. Metal is the first album, the earliest album by Pink Floyd that I can actually go and listen to again as a fan of Pink Floyd and, someone who does not like their hippie stuff. Then, in a weird twist of fate, Pink Floyd releases a stopgap between Dark Side of the Moon and Metal, and that is an album called, oh, you know what, guys, I screwed up. This is Metal album cover. This is Obscured by the Clouds. Oh, you're going to hate me in the comment section. Yeah, okay, I caught that error. I'm sorry. These album covers, by the way, lacked the distinct Pink Floydiness that would later come. I mean, look at this is like an ear, and then you got like this shitty obscured cloud. Anyway, Obscured by the Clouds, D, if not F tier. The most boring English poppy folk, sleepy, just unlistenable, no replay value. Can't stand this album. I remember buying this album on CD back in the day when I was really getting into Pink Floyd and thinking, oh great, how far is this rabbit trail going to take me? And this was about where I stopped. Again, another freaking movie soundtrack. This is like, what, their 7th studio album at this time, and they're doing another soundtrack. And it doesn't even sound like music that would be on a soundtrack. It just sounds like a regular kind of acoustic focused album, but it's supposedly to this movie, this French film La Vallée by Barbette Schroeder. I don't know, man. I guess they were riding high off of Metal a bit, so they're like, oh, the fans are wanting something. Let's just put out anything, we feel like and see if they'll buy it. Then we get to, okay, Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, come on. What can I honestly say about this album? I mean, S tier is an understatement. Dark Side of the Moon, legendary album, came out in 1973, stayed on the Billboard music charts for like 783 weeks, something like that. Just an insane amount of time, sold a gajillion records, is seen as one of the best albums of all time. The band just really were able to, again, making a Rush parallel, much like Rush took the experimentation off of Permanent Waves and parlayed that into Moving Pictures. Pink Floyd did the same with Metal and parlayed the they were able to hone the experimentation and hone the psychedelia and dial it back and put it into a more pop formula. I hate to say it. When I say pop, I mean shorter, more digestible, more deliberate choices. And that's why I think this album was so successful. They cut all the fat, not a single bad track on this entire album. The album's flow through and concept are immaculate. The quality of the recording is fantastic, stands the test of time. All the sound effects that was used, like all the cash register sounds on Money at the beginning, the clocks that ring, the alarm clocks that ring at the beginning of Time, the great gig in the sky with with Claire Torrey doing her vocal improv. that was completely improvised, by the way. It was not something that they labored over. I mean, that it's got the spontaneity, it's got the deliberacy, if that's a word. I just made it up if it's not. Brain Damage, Us and Them, Speak to Me. I mean, the whole thing is just from front to back, bona fide classic. Not too long of a listen. It's just the perfect length to hold even nowadays with, you know, people's short ass attention spans. It's just kind of the perfect album of all time. I mean, if you like jazz, if you like rock, if you like prog, if you like blues, if you like, you know, I mean, I guess the only way you wouldn't like this album is if you just really only listen to, like, I don't know, rap or I don't know. I was gonna say EDM, but it's got some of the early synthesizer work on there with songs like "On the Run" that are so that a lot of the sounds that we used then would come to form what would be early techno. So I can't even say that you know, the techno heads wouldn't listen to this album. So anyway, everybody knows Dark Side of the Moon's a classic. You see the damn prism, the triangle with the rainbow coming out of it. You see it on t-shirts everywhere. It's the most worn shirt and logo for posers who don't actually listen to the band. So, all right, whatever. Moving on to the next album, Wish You Were Here, S tier. I won't praise this as much as Dark Side, as many people tend to not, although it's just as much of a classic in its own right. Shine On You Crazy Diamond, not my like favorite Pink Floyd songs, like Sweet, that whole series of parts there, not my favorite in the world, but it's a great, fantastic movement. You know, it clocks in at 13 minutes, but it actually feels right. It feels like it's got space. There's no weird animal noises or shrieks like there are in the first, you know, 3 or 4 Pink Floyd albums. Welcome to the Machine was one of the first times I ever heard Pink Floyd. My dad put the headphones on over my ears and put on Welcome to the Machine, and that's when I fell in love with music, to be honest with you. The sounds on Welcome to the Machine blew my fucking mind. The synthesizer work that I'm assuming Richard Wright, their keyboardist, performed, although Waters may have done it. He played a little bit keyboards. And the credit on the music here goes to Waters, so maybe it was Waters who played it. Either way, the synthesizer work on this track, groundbreaking, incredible, ear candy for days. The throbbing bass panning from left to right, the mechanical noises going on in the background, these huge chasm-like pad synth sounds, but they weren't like the cheesy 80s synth sounds. They sounded like real, like orchestral kind of sounds digging through the middle of your head. The guitar work on it, the vocals, the desperate yelling of the vocals. Then you got Have a Cigar, which is just a fantastic classic 70s funk rock riff with this creepy anyway, one of the only Pink Floyd songs where the lead vocal was not sung by David Gilmour or Roger Waters. It was this guy named Roy Harper. He was kind of like this folk music guy who like opened for the band back in the day, and he happened to be in the same studio as them. And they're like, hey, because originally Roger Waters was going to sing lead vocals on this song. Come in here, dear boy, have a cigar, you're gonna go far. But it was too high for him. He could not get it. And the band, you know, it's like in the studio, it's like time is money. So anyway, I guess Roy Harper happened to be in the studio, heard what the band was working on, and he's like, do you mind if I give it a go? And they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And what you got is the vocals on the song. And it honestly, his voice fit in so good that for the longest time, I didn't know that wasn't anyone in the actual band singing lead vocals on that song. That's insane. Like, that's how fast and loose they were playing it back then. I mean, if you had a time-tested album like The Dark Side of the Moon, and then you were doing a follow-up, would you even think about letting someone else outside of the band sing lead vocals on one of your tracks? I figured you'd have things more closer to the vest than ever before at that point. But that's just how experimental this band has always been. Then you got Wish You Were Here, which is a huge like classic Pink Floyd song to a lot of the more casual listeners of the band, but it's a song that I've never really cared for all that much. It seemed a little basic for Pink Floyd at this juncture, especially with such experimental badasses like Welcome to the Machine and Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Have a Cigar. I don't know, maybe it was the more of the salve to the rest of the album's intensity that really kind of calmed you down when you got to it. But I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to have to accelerate through this list faster, or this is going to be another fucking 45-minute thing here. So the next album we have, oh my God, Animals. Can we just take a moment? Oh, and I just realized I put the fucking, okay guys, I am officially stupid as fuck. I did it again. I put The Wall instead of Wish You Were Here. My apologies. Good Lord, Josh. Get your shit together, son. Animals. My favorite Pink Floyd album, quite frankly. I think it's better than Dark Side of the Moon. This album is just the pinnacle of their songwriting capabilities, their composition capabilities, their ability to have discernment when it comes to taste and just appropriateness of like what should be in a great song and what should not be in a great song. They had honed their craft so much by this album that from start to finish, this is the perfect album. You know, you start out with an acoustic kind of very down-stated Pigs on the Wing sung by Roger Waters, and you think like, oh, you know, this already sounds better than the folky stuff they did on their first few albums, but it's still pretty laid back. And then Dogs kicks in, and it's just like this space adventure, but done exactly right. I mean, everything is just so hard to decide. The riffs were better, the melodies were better, the atmosphere was better, everything was better. It's like they finally perfected. There's all those long-winded jams on the early albums. They figured it out. They figured out the formula. And then you got Pigs, and then you got Sheep. Hey there, pig man, ha ha, Siraj you are. And then the guitar solo with the voice box where he sounds like a pig. And then at the end of Pigs, Roger Waters is doing that like disco run up the bass line. The gives me goosebumps every time I even think about it. And then Sheep, you got that looming. This album is so amazing, and I know it's dumb to say that it's underrated, but I do feel like it's underrated. I feel like people don't talk about Animals nearly as much. You ask someone about their Pink Floyd fandom, and then you bring up Animals, and that's where you really get to see where someone stands with Pink Floyd. Up next, we have The Wall. S tier all the way. This is a double album. Double albums are already hard enough as it is to be impactful and make a big splash because there's so much content that you have to take in, and usually double albums are cost prohibitive because they're literally twice the price of a regular album. This album was a masterpiece. Released in 1979, it pretty much is a Pink Floyd autobiography of the bullshit side of being a rock star through the lens of the critical, cranky old man Roger Waters. But man, is his crankiness focused and his indignation righteous on this album. And the music compositions, since this is set to a movie, finally a movie of their own. They are scoring a soundtrack to their movie this time instead of someone else's, and you better believe Roger Waters wanted to get it right this time. I mean, just the song lengths, they're so with this album, basically, is what I'll say. It's pop in the sense of not too many songs on this album go over 4 minutes in length. So you have that aspect to it. You have the constriction of, hey, this is to a movie, so we need shorter passages that all have their own different individual personalities. And since it is, you know, more on the musical side of the spectrum, they can be more exaggerated and have these more wacky elements, like the screams and the yelling and the voiceovers and the sounds of the dive bombing in the first track as he's going down to crash into the ground, this World War II pilot fighting for the British Army. And then you have, this contrast to this rock star known as Pink, who is having to deal with the loss of his father in World War II, and who is dealing with his fame as a rock star by taking drugs and becoming comfortably numb, if you will, which, by the way, is one of my favorite songs of all time. I mentioned before when I was doing the Genesis tier that Firth of Fifth has one of my favorite guitar solos in all time, my second favorite guitar solo of all time in it. Comfortably Numb, my favorite guitar solo of all time, bar none. That guitar solo that David Gilmour wrote encompasses the entire emotion and concept of this album in one guitar solo. There's more emotion in that fucking guitar solo than in whole band's entire catalogs. I can't believe how good this album is. And then you have Empty Spaces, the synthesizer work and the creepiness. Roger Waters does creepy so well, and this is creepy in a good way. It's looming, it's dark, it's so anti-pop, but pop at the same time in the sense that of its brevity and its focus on creating these individual songs that are all good and stand on their own. Classic album. Enough good things cannot be said about it. Their S tier or their top tier albums are just some of the best out there, not even just for Pink Floyd, but just in general. Then we get to their next album, and things start getting into a weird territory for me. We get into the final cut, which is, I'm going to put at, I'll be generous and give it a B. The final cut were songs that didn't make it onto the wall. And quite frankly, as David Gilmour put it, if they're not good enough to make it onto the wall, then why are they good enough now, Roger? To which Roger Waters responds, "Shut up and do what you're told. I'm in charge." It's not exactly how it went down, but it's pretty much how it went down. These were essentially B-sides from The Wall, and it definitely shows. A lot of these songs feel very derivative of songs that were already on The Wall. A lot of them feel like just the more ballady style songs that were on The Wall, and there's much less rocking songs on this album, except for there are some exceptions, like When the Tigers Broke Free is a good song. That song was actually in The Wall, but for whatever reason it didn't make it onto the album The Wall. The Gunner's Dream is a good song, and Not Now, John is probably the most rocking song, and the only track, by the way, that features David Gilmour's vocal. If you want to hear how a fantastic album like The Wall, can be watered down and turned almost crappy, the final cut is like a sad look behind that curtain. It's like, I don't want to hear these guys I don't want them to be able to make an album that I like sound like a lesser version. And that's what the final cut felt like. And that's what the band pretty much felt like about the album too. Although now, with hindsight being, in rose-colored glasses, a lot of the fans look upon the final cut in a more favorable light than they did at the time. So, it is what it is. We're starting to get out of Pink Floyd's A-tier, top-tier cream of the crop, and I like to call this the post-Roger Waters phase of Pink Floyd, which it sounds different, but in not a bad way. The first album is Momentary Lapse of Reason. That's an A-tier for me album. Momentary Lapse of Reason is very 80s sounding, but 80s in the way that Pink Floyd would sound in the 80s. It's got the everything drenched in reverb. It's got the big sounding echoey drums. It's got the heavily chorused guitar solos, but it sounds good because it's 3/4 of Pink Floyd. And it's got the amazing David Gilmour on lead vocals on every song. That's one thing I was actually going to say about the final cut. Roger Waters does all of the lead vocals. I'm sorry, but Roger Waters is not a lead singer guy. He's every now and then he really adds some nice spice vocally kind of guy. David Gilmour is a lead singer. He can sing on every track and it makes sense. So that's what we have now. And Signs of Life, great Great starter to the album, very spooky, establishing that spookiness that Pink Floyd's kind of known for. I mean, their whole album, all their whole discography has this theme of spookiness. Learning to Fly, fantastic song. Dogs of War, One Slip, On the Turning Away. I said I wanted that song played at my funeral. I love that song. Very dark and bright at the same time. Yet Another Movie, a New Machine, Terminal Frost. Sorrow is amazing guitar work in that song. The feel, the vibe. This is a late night drive album. You're driving late at night down the city street with the street lights, or you're driving in it's dawn or it's the dusk or whatever, just some kind of darkness. You throw on this album, perfect vibe. Next, we get the Division Bell. I'm going to put this in the B tier. Not as good as Momentary Lapse of Reason. There are definitely some good songs on here, like, Cluster 1, the beginning track is good. What Do You Want From Me, I think, is decent. Marooned is good. Keep Talking, good. High Hope's good. Everything else, not so good. I don't know. It's just, at this point, it's really... they've been apart from Roger Waters for so long that any kind of original Pink Floyd A-tier spirit is kind of gone, and now it's really just the David Gilmour show. And if you listen to his solo albums, they sound very similar to this. And if you look at the writers on this album, it's all mostly Gilmour, with Rick Wright doing a little bit of contribution, and you even have co-writers Bob Ezrin, Polly Sampson, Nick Clowes. You have, it starts to feel like more of a corporate thing at this point. Like, oh, we got to do the new Floyd album, and it's got to be done right. So let's get all these people from the outside, which they didn't need before. So why would they need now? Anyway, it's a bit lackluster. And unfortunately, that's where the Pink Floyd story ends for most people until 2014. The Endless River came out, which is essentially Division Bell B-sides. I'm putting this in the C tier. Not quite as bad as their early work. And I shouldn't say bad. I should say not quite as hippie, psychedelic jam. But then again, it is. But then again, it's another part unfinished work. Basically what happened was Rick Wright passed away. Kind of in his honor, they decided to finish some of the demos they had lying around. They decided to kind of put this together as a memorial to their Dave Gilmour's late friend and former band member. And so they released Endless River. And it's just, I've already done an in-depth review on this album on my channel. It was I think it was like the second official video I ever did on this channel back in like 2015. I'll put a card up here in the right or left corner if you want to see that video, because I really go more in depth on there. But this is basically just a bunch of bits that were left over from the Division Bell sessions, and it just sounds like it. It sounds unfinished. In fact, there are no vocals on this entire album until the last song, Louder Than Words. And even then, I just take issue with some of the lyrics. I think one of the lines is, we diss each other on sight, and I still take issue with the fact that David Gilmour actually put the phrase "diss each other" in Pink Floyd's history. Like, come on, man. Like, don't ever. Pink Floyd should never have the line "diss" in. I mean, that is such like common slang. They're supposed to be these gods that are not of Earth, so don't be talking like some fucking 8th grader. Yo, dog, you diss me? Then they got Talkin' Hawkin', which is recycled shit that Stephen Hawking said off their Division Bell album, Keep Talking, and I don't know, man. It's just kind of a fucking mess. It's more of an ambient jam album, if you will, but I'm not really a fan of it, and I felt like it was kind of a cash grab. We need more Pink Floyd material in 2014. Let's just poop this out. Very unfinished. It's a shame that's the last thing we have to end on. However, we have, at least in my approximation, 4 just earth-changing, music will never be the same again albums that went bam, 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 bam. So for that, Pink Floyd, I thank you very much. We're clocking at 35 minutes. Good Lord, I thought this was going to be quicker. Do you guys agree with my list? Do you disagree? Let's hear what you have to say in the comments below. I have a lot of fun doing these videos, so I hope you enjoy watching them. Until next time, have a good rest of your night.